Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Let the filibustering begin.
Welcome to Nerd Party.
Hello and welcome to Filibuster here on the Nerd Party. On today's show, we go higher, faster, further as we take a deep dive into the world of Captain Marvel. Will it be a case of, oh Captain, my Captain, or is it not so marvellous debut for Carol Danvers? To discuss Marvel's first female-led film that was released on International Women's Day and currently the #1 film in the world, we have two straight white men, the perfect people to be discussing this. I'm Dallas King, and with me is Lee Hutchison. How are you?
Yeah, I'm really good. I am aware of my privilege as I record this episode. It's one of those ones that, unfortunately, just due to scheduling, we couldn't really get anyone else in. We're doing this as sort of a 3-podcast marathon as you're about to go to India. So, yeah, people will just have to make do with more white nerds talking about a comic book movie. But I suspect we're going to be more positive than some of the white nerds out there.
Absolutely. I mean, this was, of course, a small tongue-in-cheek reference to the furore that emerged from Brie Larson's request to see more women and diversity at press junkets. You know, it should be clear to be said that she never actually said she wanted to stop white men attending the press conference. It was just to have increase the number of women attending. But of course, that didn't stop internet crybabies choosing to hear what they wanted to hear. And to those guys, I highly recommend they go onto YouTube and listen to Bo Burnham's song "Straight White Man." So, but now on Filibuster, of course, we always champion female filmmakers with the hashtag 52 films by women and our weekly recommendations. But before we get to those, we need to discuss what we've been seeing this week. And I want to talk about another strong female character who debuted in the past couple of weeks on the big screen. And that was the story of WWE superstar Paige in Fighting With My Family. Now, I've made no bones about it, and I've made several references to my fondness for wrestling. And indeed, one of the best storylines in wrestling at the moment is all about women and includes, well, ironically, the man, Becky Lynch, getting her shot at WrestleMania, hopefully. But Lee, this is I think you're probably your first introduction into the world of wrestling and WWE. And I want to know, did you finally smell what The Rock was cooking?
Yeah, I've been kind of looking forward to this movie. I thought it had some good trailers. I really loved Jack Loudon, Florence Pugh, Nick Frost. So it was kind of a movie that had me relatively quite excited. So I sort of saw Captain Marvel one day on Friday with my girlfriend, and then we made a rare trip again to see another film, and we saw Fighting With My Family, which my girlfriend was quite looking forward to, and we really enjoyed it. It was one of those movies that put a real smile on my face, and I mean this in the best possible way, but it kind of reminds me of the sort of film that people might watch on Netflix or BBC around Christmas time. And I just thought it was a really charming movie. Florence Pugh is great in it. Jack Loudon, in a sort of, relatively sort of traditional role in these sorts of things, was great. Nick Frost firing on all cylinders. Vince Vaughn, really good as sort of that guy that helps push you over the finish line, you've not shaken my hand and I've not given up kind of role. So yeah, I really enjoyed it. It was a charming film, and while I was never a wrestling fan myself, my brother and many of my friends at school were, so many of the references did sort of click with me, sort of the SmackDowns and the Raws, and I just thought it was an all-round enjoyable film. It made me happy.
Yeah, no, I think the strength of the film is, I really enjoyed it, both from a wrestling perspective, but also it's just a great sort of, underdog story of someone who's not meant to make it. And, it follows the standard format. It's got the three act structure. Vince Vaughn did a great job, and a couple of years ago playing a drill instructor during Hacksaw Ridge, and he's sort of doing that here again. He's playing the guy who's pushing these people to be the best, and it's a good turn from him as well. But I think it's Stephen Merchant wrote and directed this film based on the documentary that The Rock saw one evening eating his body weight in sushi when he was filming Fast and Furious in London. And what Stephen Merchant done here, which is great, is he's made your typical underdog story, but what he's done is he actually has respect for wrestling, and it's never a joke. There are jokes in it, but it's never at the expense of the wrestling. We all know by now, that wrestling it's not fake. but it can be fixed, and that they predetermine who's going to win and all the storylines and stuff like that. But I think it's great that it shows you that side, and it's basically it has a real sort of heart and respect for it. And I think that's what a lot of people who maybe aren't huge sort of wrestling fans, they've gone to see this and they've taken away the family sort of drama side of it, because Jack Loudon, he was one of those guys that I didn't realize even after seeing like the first couple of trailers that it was Jack Loudon. He's that good. He just seems to disappear into the role. And he's the guy who wanted to be in the WWE. His sister kind of was tagged along at the beginning, and eventually got into wrestling, but it was always his dream, and the fact that he's the one that gets passed over and she gets the shot for WWE sort of sets them kind of at odds. And so you've got that family drama side of it, as well as the traditional sort of Rocky-esque, is she going to be able to make it and stuff like that. Now, as a wrestling fan, I can easily point out that there are huge historical inaccuracies in the plot, in the fact that Paige technically became the NXT Women's Champion and then went on to become the Divas Champion and stuff like that. But of course, that would make for a far too confusing story structure for people who are not as au fait with wrestling as I am. So therefore, I can understand why they did that. But again, you get these people on the internet going, "Oh, that's not how it happened" and stuff. But everyone takes dramatic license with these stories, and I think it works perfectly for what it's trying to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. As I say, I think we came out of it, and me and my girlfriend actually prefer this to sort of the big release of the week. And it's while they both look very different to say sort of Captain Marvel, one thing that me and my girlfriend kind of remarked on when we watched sort of this double bill of movies, one day after another, was that both films have these strong female characters, and neither of them have love interests at all. And it's really good to see sort of those kind of characters that they're pushing and pursuing their dreams, but they've got the support of their friends around them. They have maybe perhaps conflict with family members and friends as opposed to sort of loved ones, and that certainly was a welcome change from a lot of films.
Absolutely. And you've got she's the sort of gothy looking British girl from Norwich. She turns up, and you've got all these former cheerleaders and dancers, 6 foot tall, blonde bombshells. And of course, at first, they're at odds with each other because, there's only a certain number of places and they both think that the other person doesn't belong. But rather than them becoming enemies, I like the fact that they ended up working together so they could all try and achieve their dreams, which is a great sort of role model sort of thing for young women to have at this point. And like you say, it ties in nicely with what's going on at the moment with Captain Marvel. But what else have you been seeing this week other than sort of...
Yeah, so in a way, I've sort of been I suppose I caught a kind of few other movies. I saw The Hole in the Ground, the A24 in America film, which was okay. It was a bit of a disappointment. It sort of leaned into sort of the creepy kid one a bit too much. So it's all about a young mother who's escaping sort of her broken past, and they move into this old creaky house that's next to some creepy woods. And there are certainly some good moments. The performances by the lead, Siansa Kowalski, was really good. But I just found it sort of a bit kind of cliche, and it leaned into sort of some of the old tropes that we kind of get a lot in sort of horror movies. So, it was an enjoyable enough film. I also caught Border, so the Swedish film that's kind of been making a lot of kind of indie critics kind of purr over the past few months. This was one I'd missed out in London. And it's about a border guard in Sweden that has a sense of smell for kind of smugglers, whether it's booze, drugs, and such like. And it's a very interesting story. The less you know, kind of, the better going into this one. I'd sort of managed to make myself quite cocooned in this one. So, yeah, quite a lot of the twists and turns were a bit of a surprise for me. So, if you can avoid the trailer, avoid maybe reading some of the reviews, I think you're going to be in for a treat. And one of the sort of movies that, it's very rare that me and my girlfriend will ever watch one film in a week together, let alone two, but we actually found time to watch a third, and we watched Little Italy, which is directed by Donald Petrie, who is sort of known for films like Miss Congeniality and How to Lose a Guy in 10 Days. So this film became a bit notorious last year online for sort of their poster, which had Emma Roberts and Hayden Christensen, which made it look like it was sort of an early 2000s, late 90s rom-com. And in a way, that's kind of what it is. Me and my girlfriend were watching it, and we kind of kind of and enjoyed it in a way. It is sort of cheesy. It's very self-aware. It plays on quite a few stereotypes, but we watched it and sort of kind of giggled along for the most part. It's one of these movies you're watching and it is such a throwback, and it kind of reminds you of the films that you did watch in sort of those early 2000s, maybe on your first dates when you were sort of 16-year-old. And when I was kind of describing it to my girlfriend, I was like, "Hey, do you want to watch this movie?" And it's always nearly kind of responded to with a no, especially when it's one that I'm doing for sort of the podcast. But with Little Italy, when I kind of described it, she went sort of like a kind of early 2000s rom-com. She's like, "Yeah, I'm up for watching that." So we watched that one in bed last night. So, not the most romantic of evening, but we had a real kick from it. And Hayden Christensen, it reminded me that the guy's had a bit of a troubled career, really, in terms of some of his choices and sort of the reviews that he's had. But I think of a movie like Shattered Glass, which I think is criminally underrated, and he puts in a fantastic performance in this. But him and Emma Roberts have a nice bit of chemistry together, and it was one that we enjoyed. It's a kind of good Saturday night movie, a little disposable, but it was kind of fine to watch, and we enjoyed it.
Okay, no, it's based on that, I might give it a watch, because I think Hayden Christensen is maybe due a bit of a reappraisal, because I agree with you. Shattered Glass was a great film, and one that he was actually very good in it. And I think, to be honest, he comes in for so much criticism for his performances in the Star Wars prequels, but I think a lot of that might be down to the direction of George Lucas, who managed to get bad performances from the likes of Natalie Portman, who was not that great in some of the, particularly Attack of the Clones. I think off the top of my head, the dialogue that they were given to work with was what I was going to say, not great. It was awful, quite frankly. And so therefore, maybe it'd be interesting to see him in another role where he's maybe not working with green screen and stuff like that, and working with real people. So I might give that one a watch as well. Yeah, and speaking of sort of throwbacks to an earlier time, it probably ties in quite well with our main release. But before that, as always mentioned before, we always do our 52 films by women # recommendations for the week. So Lee, what is your pick for this week?
Yeah, I'm going with something that's very on brand with that, and that's Mississippi Grind. It's a directorial double pairing from Ryan Fleck and Anna Boden, who have recently just made Captain Marvel. So we all kind of know about Marvel's reputation of hoovering up independent filmmakers, and I never actually kind of realised that it was these guys that had done it. So I watched this movie recently for an upcoming episode of the A24 Project, our other podcast, and I was kind of watching it, and I was like, yeah, this is really enjoyable, and I wonder what other movies they've done. And sort of I've managed to not kind of hoover up too much information on Captain Marvel, and I knew that it had a female co-director, but I never realised who it actually was, and it's the director of Mississippi Grind. So Mississippi Grind features Ben Mendelsohn, who also appears in Captain Marvel, and also has Ryan Reynolds, also in another sort of Marvel movie in terms of Deadpool. So this is about sort of a down-and-out gambler who kind of comes across Curtis. He's the younger, more charismatic poker player, and the two sort of go on a bit of a road trip trying to make some money, and whether they can kind of do it. And it was a movie that really surprised me. A couple of years ago, I tried to watch this movie, and I never really got too far in. I think I was watching on a train on an iPad, which is never the best for sort of these kind of things. And I kind of went into it a few earlier this week, not the most excited in the world for it, and I was pleasantly surprised by the charismatic leads. We see a bit of the South in a very different way, and it's a kind of stressful and engaging storyline, and I can't quite see sort of the connection between Mississippi Grind and Captain Marvel, what this movie did that made them think, these are the people to direct our first kind of big female lead Marvel movie. But it's well worth checking out just to sort of see their sort of humble beginnings, and films that would surprise you. You would watch Mississippi Grind and you wouldn't think, hey, your next step is Marvel. So it's really good to sort of see where these directors kind of got their start.
Yeah, no, I just watched this film last night as well for, as you say, the upcoming A24 project, and I wanted to see it, because of their work on Captain Marvel as well. And I think it's probably unsurprising to say that my pick for this week for 52 films by women is Captain Marvel, directed, of course, by Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck, who were also the team behind Half Nelson, although back then it was just Ryan Fleck. directing, although they both wrote the script for those ones as well. So I guess we can move neatly and a beautiful segue into Captain Marvel. And Captain Marvel is the 21st, we're up to 21 already, 21st film, but 21, very popular for Mississippi Grind as well, if you're playing Blackjack. 21st film of the MCU, directed by Anna Boden and Ryan Fleck, and was written by them along with Nicole Perlman, who also did the story for Guardians of the Galaxy. The final screenplay was written by James Gunn, but she did a lot of work on the story. And Guardians of the Galaxy is probably the other sort of cinematic universe film which has probably the best sort of female representation in terms of strong female characters in it. And it features the story of Kree warrior Veers, who is kidnapped during a mission by the Skrulls, which sees them unlock some memories to her true identity on Earth, a puzzle that she aims to solve with the help of S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Nick Fury. So, Lee, what were your first thoughts going into this? Were you excited about it? Did you know much about the character of Captain Marvel going in, and what did you hope to see on the big screen?
Yeah, I'm not the biggest sort of Marvel person in the world. That I don't watch the Marvel TV series. I never read the comic books. I was always more of a DC fan, and when I say DC, I mean Batman. I never read any of the sort of Superman ones. So I enjoy the Marvel movies. They're always a bit of an event for me. It's one of these few films where I go see a lot of films myself, and Marvel movies are always that opportunity to, you get a group of folk together. Hey, let's go see these movies, and it's a good excuse to catch up. And it's one of the few sort of series that both me and my girlfriend who will go check out together. So I'd kind of been a bit lukewarm on sort of the trailers. I wasn't too fussed about them, but I was kind of excited about the cast. And yeah, I went in sort of, looking forward to it, but not with the highest of expectations. I was excited to see what Brie Larson did. She's obviously going to be the next sort of captain of the Avengers. So I kind of went in curious, and I enjoyed the film in some respects, and others are not. That my issues with it are more sort of on a kind of technical level as opposed to anything to do with the, any sort of female empowerment or anything like that. I think the film was really badly lit, and that I struggled to get past that because I found there was elements of the film where I was just sort of struggling to kind of see what was going on. And what I liked was that I enjoyed the companionship sort of between Captain Marvel and Nick Fury, her fellow co-pilot, her name's escaped me. I really liked those scenes, and it was sort of spoiled for me, sort of. When you go into these films, you do have a degree of, these characters have appeared in these things and some of that. But I felt the trailer sort of had done a bit of a poor job that, there's a lot of fans out there that pay attention to who the Kree are, Ronan, etc., etc. But the sort of trailer very much played away that Jude Law was going to become the bad guy in this film, and in the beginning, you don't get that impression. Hey, they're gung-ho teammates and getting up to adventures through the galaxy. But the sort of trailer betrayed that twist was going to come, and it was something I maybe had seen coming, but I felt the trailer had sort of done a bit of a disservice there, and it sort of kills a bit of the tension at the beginning of the movie. But I think it has a nice message about refugees. I thought it had some good action. I think Brie Larson did well for her first time in sort of a movie on this scope and scale. I thought it was perfectly fine. It's not a movie that I particularly would rave about or maybe go see again. I thought the performances were good, but it just felt like I was like, I've kind of seen this a little bit before. It's sort of traditional Marvel. It felt like a Marvel Phase 1 film, but maybe a bit lower down sort of in that area. And yeah, it was fine. I'm curious to see what she does next, and it feels like I'm really keen for sort of a Marvel's Endgame next. And then sort of the last two movies have been they've been fine, but I really want the next one. And I think sort of knowing this has been coming has maybe sort of dampened the other movies. I feel like Milhouse in the episode of The Simpsons, like, when are they getting to the firework factory? And here we are now. It's like a month and a half away, and I'm ready.
I can understand what you're saying, and we'll sort of discuss some aspects of it first, and then we'll go into spoiler territory. So if anyone hasn't seen Captain Marvel yet, we'll give you the point where you can go away, watch Captain Marvel, and then come back, and then sort of hear what we think about the sort of spoiler stuff like that. But I think, I do understand that I've I've seen the film twice now. So I saw it on opening night, sort of midnight, and came away kind of maybe slightly sort of underwhelmed, not overwhelmed. Can you ever just be whelmed? I believe you can in Europe anyway. But a lot of the issues I did have with it were gone on the second viewing, and I think the problem it has is the first act is very, very messy in terms of you're sort of launched into the story, and the first act almost sort of played out not even like Guardians of the Galaxy, but I'm not sure if it was maybe the design of the scrolls, but it felt almost like a Star Trek film almost, if you can understand that, in that, they're on this mission and they're being told they can't, mess with the inhabitant life forms on the planet. They're there to get a refugee, extract someone without no one can know that they're there and stuff like this. And it felt sort of like the front beginning of I think it was Star Trek Into Darkness when they were trying to do that, and it kind of had that sort of feel to it. And then you go into this strange sort of, but kind of cool sort of Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, sort of digging in the brain of Veers, trying to figure out her memories and stuff like that. And this is Ben Mendelsohn's. He's the leader of the Skrulls, and I love the fact that for some whatever reason, maybe he just decided to just keep his Australian accent for the villain, which was really odd, but just it kind of worked for that. And yeah, I think it really sort of picks up in the second act once she arrives on Earth and is sort of partnered with Nick Fury. And I just want to put this out here: the CGI is absolutely incredible with how they de-age Samuel L. Jackson. It's like when you first see it, you're like, whoa, but then like within a couple of minutes, you don't even notice it and you completely forget that he's not that age. It's like it's weirdly more noticeable on Clark Gregg in the scenes where he turns up as Coulson. It's like I don't know, it seems to be like when it's like one static shot it can kind of go a bit funny, but if they're on the move you don't notice it. But what did you think of the CGI on Sam Jackson?
Yeah, I thought the Sam Jackson one was really good. I think it's not a slight on the CGI at all, but it always just takes that little bit of time to settle into it. It's the same with sort of Michael Douglas in the Ant-Man movie, and then when you had Robert Downey Jr. in Civil War, you're like, oh, okay, yeah, it's a little bit, but it's pretty good. And this one I thought was really good because you sort of settle into it quite quickly with Sam Jackson. You're like, yeah, that looks pretty good. But the Clark Gregg one, I definitely thought it stood out a little bit. I think it was actually the hair that it was so jet black that it just sort of looked a bit odd.
Yeah, no, and I don't know if Samuel Jackson was wearing a wig when he was shooting, or because it looks very similar to the hair he had. I think it was in the Negotiator. So I don't know if they've either CGI'd the hair on or whether he had to wear a wig the entire time. But I mean, this is the most they've ever done this. Before in the previous ones, it was maybe like one scene they did, but to have an entire film where your second lead character is essentially, entirely CGI'd on the face and stuff like that is quite ballsy, and I think they managed to pull it off, which I thought was great. Another one, because when you get into Act 2, if you're straight into the soundtrack alone is enough to tell you that they're in the mid '90s, and all sort of female led songs as well. Obviously a choice on that. You've got like Salt and Pepper, you've got Elastica, you've got a whole Celebrity Skin at the end as well, and then the one of the fight scenes is choreographed to sort of like Just a Girl by No Doubt as well. And yeah, so you're in the '90s, you got the fashion and stuff like that, but it also felt to me a bit like an episode of Doctor Who, I think, as well. Especially now that Doctor Who is a woman as well. That one was called, our first episode was called The Woman Who Fell to Earth. And, in this, Brie Larson's character falls to Earth, and then she's basically working, to try and solve this conflict between sort of two alien races and stuff on Earth as well. So it kind of felt like a sort of Doctor Who plot almost rather than a Marvel plot to begin with. But I know what you mean. It felt very Phase 1-y in terms of being fairly unaffected by the bigger MCU sort of goings on, although Actually, we'll get into the spoilers things because we're about to mention something, but that will be a spoiler as to what comes up later on. But I thought the second viewing, I sort of the issues sort of did go away, but I think the crux of it may come down to the fact that this is essentially an origin movie for the character of Carol Danvers, and you don't really get a true sense of who she is until the third act, and so therefore the main character and the audience are maybe kind of slightly lost as to what's going on, and to be truly emotionally invested in what's going on until the third act. But once that third act kicks in, and there's a sequence where there was the people would have been cheering. It's like a real sort of fist pump moment that you're just like, yes, I can't believe it. But I mean, I just want to touch upon the moment that did get the crowd, give a crowd a huge audible reaction. I don't know if it was like this the screening you had, but I went to the midnight screening, and the opening Marvel Studio credits they normally have sort of clips of all the various heroes who've been in all the films, but this time it was all Stan Lee's cameos, and it basically got a spontaneous round of applause at the end when that finished. It came up with just "Thank you, Stan," and that really nearly had me going. I think at that point there was a lot of people who thought that was a really class act on Marvel's part. What did you think of that?
Well, I really liked it, and I knew there was going to be some sort of tribute or something, but I didn't expect that, and I thought it was such a class one. It was slightly ruined by my girlfriend turning to me and going, "Who is that?" And I was like, "Oh, that's Stan Lee. Pretty much created all these characters." So it's one of these things that I always find it interesting to watch these Marvel movies with people that are sort of not in that bubble that will go along and see these movies. And she remembered what the bloody Tesseract was, but she wasn't able to say, "Oh, who is this person?" I was like, "Oh yeah, he created the characters and died." And she's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, right, fine." So it's always a nice
he's
reminder.
He's that old guy who's been in all those movies. I've always seen that old guy just sort of hanging around in the background. Yeah, who was he? Yeah,
exactly.
But one of the interesting things about Stan Lee's cameo in this, which throws up a huge question about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, is that Stan Lee is playing Stan Lee in this one, because his cameo is he's on the elevated train in Los Angeles and he's reading the script for Mallrats, practicing his line, true believer and stuff like this. And so that means that Stan Lee is in Mallrats. So Mallrats exists within the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And so Stan Lee as a comic creator exists within the cinematic universe. So which Marvel comics has he created in this? I would assume you could speculate that perhaps he did Captain America comics, based on the fact that Captain America was in the 40s, Marvel Comics would have started around then. He could have done stories inspired by that. Maybe the X-Men exist in this universe as a comic creation, perhaps Fantastic Four. Certainly, if this film is set in 1995, he wouldn't have been able to create characters like Iron Man, Spider-Man, and such like. What do you think of that little wrinkle in the MCU space-time continuum, so to speak?
Yeah, I thought it was such a good moment, and I'd heard that they sort of recorded a lot of these cameos in advance, and I thought this one was such a clever one because, though I must admit, my main issue is that I feel this sort of cameo has been ruined by sort of the Kevin Smith thing. So obviously Kevin Smith put up a picture of him crying after having watched the film, being touched obviously by this moment, and it was more ruined out by like going like, okay, so this cameo is like within sort of 25 minutes of the film. He has watched the film, gone home, taken a picture where he is crying, and I was like, oh, that slightly annoyed me. These fates cried for this picture, and it felt quite disingenuous. And I know that's really petty, but it sort of ruined the cameo for me.
Oh, shit. But I thought it was a lovely cameo. I mean, I think from what I can gather, he's got one more cameo to come. I think his last one will be in Avengers Endgame, so it'll be interesting to see what they do for that one. But I just like the fact that Stan Lee, the comic creator, is now canon in this universe as well, which was really nice. And I mean, what did you make of the Nick Fury eye incident? Because I don't know, because a lot of people have got issues with humor that's used in Marvel movies. Apparently, they're becoming too reliant on humor. I don't know if this is spawned by how well Thor Ragnarok did, but I was almost hoping for, I don't know if you've ever seen Hot Tub Time Machine or Hot Tub Time Machine 2, but there's a running gag about they meet this guy who's lost an arm, and when they go back in time, he's got two arms, and they basically are waiting for him to lose his arm. And he gets into all these different accidents, but it never happens until right at the end. And I was wondering if this is what was going to happen to Nick Fury. He'd continually get hit or bashed in the eye, or something would happen to his eye, and you think, oh, this is the moment, this is the moment. And then, of course, it's maybe not what you're expecting in terms of the end result, but maybe that's one for the spoilers, I don't know.
Yeah, it's definitely a spoiler, and I think it's one of those moments like you kind of forget at the beginning. You're watching it, and you go, oh, it's at one point you click, oh, he's definitely got both eyes. And I was sort of trying to remember what the line in sort of Winter Soldier was during the film, where it's like, yeah, the last person that I trusted cost me an eye, and I was thinking like, so he's only trusting sort of Captain Marvel here, and this green alien, and a couple of other people. I can't really imagine them taking out of his eye, or maybe it's going to be some sort of firefight. And then when it came around that it was the cat, I thought, that's absolutely brilliant. And I was sitting there thinking, how good is that going to look in sort of a Wikipedia page, where it's like, obviously it'll be put sort of at the top of almost one of the top paragraphs of the start of the Nick Fury character timeline. He was so in love with this cat, and it scratched his eye out. I just thought that was quite an amusing touch. It was well played.
I know. What did you make of Goose overall? Did you like this addition to the MCU?
I liked Goose, and I must admit, for a whole part, I thought it was going to turn into Annette Bening. I don't know if that was me, but I really liked the cat. I'm not a cat person by any stretch, so I very much related to people having issues with a cat, but I thought it was pretty cool.
Yeah, no, I thought there was there was something about the cat that was slightly off from the beginning, and I thought, because I remember, was it Men in Black? There was like the cat had like the universe thing on its thing. I thought there was always something more to do with the cat then. But yeah, I guess it could have been like a shape-shifting Annette Bening or something, but it wasn't. But yeah, no, I did like that, and I thought it was a nice touch, and I hope that we see more from Goose in the future. Since he's maybe, let's just say, he's not your everyday cat, there's potential for him to still be around come end game time, if Goose survived the snap, and is he the one to take down Thanos? Who knows? So what did you think of Brie Larson?
Yeah, Brie Larson was really good in it, I must say. It's not the best performance I've ever kind of seen from her, but I thought she did really well. And I think these movies can always be, you almost kind of get one to sort of just kind of nail it right. And she hasn't kind of come from a background of lots of CGI and green screen, but I thought she did really well. And I think when she was kind of got the role, I was like, well, that's such an endorsement. She's an Oscar-winning actress. She doesn't need to be doing movies like this, but she is in it. She's involved in it. And the one thing that I perhaps loved more is sort of her kind of on the press tour than the actual film. And that's not a slight on her performance at all. I just think she, the videos of her kicking around the cinemas and serving up popcorn, etc. I just thought were really good, and that shows sort of her real character there. And I just think she's an excellent actress, and I'm looking forward to seeing how she's going to gel with sort of the other Avengers actors, and which relationships are going to kind of spark out from that one. I don't mean romantic relationships, but sort of which characters they mix with. At the beginning, I never would have sort of seen Thor and Rocket Raccoon as a great film relationship. So I'm looking forward to seeing how she gels with the team and what she's going to bring to this sort of franchise over the next decade potentially.
I know, yeah, she's got a great sense of humour in it, and she's got like a real spark about her, and can sort of sparks off Nick Fury quite well. I think I would love to see, her and Paul Rudd's Ant-Man. I think they'd be quite a good, interesting combination as well, because I thought that was maybe where it was going to go based on what the events of Ant-Man and the Wasp. I thought they were maybe going to meet up before sort of tying into the main story, but that's going to get into the spoiler section in a minute. But I have to commend Brie Larson's acting, especially with Goose, because apparently I did read on the press tour something that apparently she's allergic to cats, so I don't know how they got around that filming with Goose. But good on her for effectively playing someone who really likes cats, because that's top acting. But the rest of the questions I've kind of got and I want to get onto is going to sort of stray into spoiler territory. So this is your warning now, spoiler warning. So if you haven't seen it, pause here, come back afterwards. Have you gone? Okay, cool. So one of the ones I want to talk about is Ben Mendelsohn's Talos, the Skrull. So what did you think of him as a villain? Because, Marvel get a lot of stick over the sort of one-note, one-dimensional villains. I'm thinking of like Malekith the Accursed. Oh, wow, I remembered that name first time. It's very surprising. Ronan the Accuser in Guardians of the Galaxy. But what I really liked about this character is he had actually a proper arc, more of an arc than some of the other characters in the film. And I really like the way that they did the reveal for his character along the way and how it worked. I thought it was really well done, and I thought he was one of the highlights of the film for me.
Yeah, I really liked Jude Law in it, but I felt that he was a little bit wasted because, he obviously is still alive at the end of the movie, which is a huge plus, and we might see him again. But you almost feel like you only get one shot sometimes with these villains, and you want to make it count. And I thought he had a really strong beginning, strong ending, but he completely vanishes out of the movie in sort of the middle, and it felt a bit televisual, sort of the third act reveal. Oh, he's actually a bad guy, and but like the moments that sort of the highlight of sort of the Captain Marvel character, I don't need to prove myself to you, and I really like those moments were earned sort of in the first act. But I just want more of Jude Law. He's one of my favorite actors, and it's great, and he's in a movie like this. But I was like, use him a little bit more, and you don't need to use him more, and it will be at the expense of Captain Marvel herself. But I felt it could have been used a little bit more instead of keeping him on sort of the spaceship for the middle.
Yeah, no, and the fact that he is still alive at the end does allow for a situation where we could have Robert Downey Jr. Sherlock Holmes meets Jude Law's Dr. Watson in the same scene as Benedict Cumberbatch's Sherlock Holmes meeting Martin Freeman's Dr. Watson. There seem to be just collecting Sherlocks and Watsons together in some strange cinematic universe thing, which is interesting. But I think, yeah, the reveal that he was essentially the main villain was almost kind of expected, and then also slightly wasted. You could kind of see it coming a mile off, and I was much more invested in Ben Mendelsohn's sort of story where they start off as the villains. They're these terrorists who are taking over planets and stuff like that, and the Kree are trying to wipe them out, and then it turns out they're just refugees really, and they're just wanting to find a home, and he was doing all this just to be reunited with his family who are on board this ship. And I really like the way that played out, and I just thought he was great. That sort of scene where he turns up as his true self, the Skrull form, sort of sipping on a soda and sort of being all cool and nonchalant, I thought was great. And yeah, I thought he gave a really good, well-rounded performance, especially given the fact that he was under makeup half the time as well, I thought. But I mean, the design of the Skrulls for me was very sort of Star Trek-y, I thought.
Yeah, it was, and you're 100% spot on with that, because that was also what I got the impression of. That I don't know if you're familiar with 2001 Star Trek Nemesis, where they very much look like the Remans, and I'm sure a section of this listeners will be familiar with that reference, but they basically look sort of like the old school, was it Nostromo or whatever it was, vampires. And I kind of got that impression as well. They definitely look like the Remans from Star Trek Nemesis, so I'm sure on some level there's been some subliminal messaging put into your head about Star Trek.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it did seem that it did have that sort of plot, sort of storyline thread going through it there, where it seemed very much like that. And it'd be interesting to see where the film goes for. I mean, given the fact that it has made $455 million this weekend worldwide, about 163 in the US and about 320 odd around the world, huge numbers. So there will definitely be a sequel, but where and when that sequel takes place will be quite interesting, I think, because the direct place to go for a sequel is her taking on the Kree and the Supreme Intelligence and that. But I just don't know if that will work given Avengers Endgame, in the fact that, do we really want to go back in time again given that there's all this momentum moving towards Endgame, and then what happens after that. Where would you like to see a potential sequel take place?
Yeah, I was kind of torn about that one as well because they've sort of left themselves this huge period of time that they can sort of dive into. And I remembered where there was talk when they were going to do sort of the second Captain America movie that it would actually be a prequel again. It would be more of kind of Captain America with the Howling Commandos. But I really like the idea of her and sort of him in the present day. And I think they'll probably do something very similar here because it's all really going to depend on what characters that you've got left. I mean, the Guardians of the Galaxy, that might be the end of them coming to sort of the end of their series if they even make the third one. It's all a bit up in the air at the moment. And then, you've got sort of the Doctor Strange, so it'll be interesting to see where they do place her. I think it will probably be sort of the earthy realm to some extent, but I think they'll definitely maybe take advantage of that sort of time that's been passed, and I think it would be perhaps a wasted opportunity, but I'm sure there'll be something that will fill in the gaps in some way.
People have criticised Marvel for the fact that it's taken them 21 films to have their first female-led superhero movie, but I think purely on the fact that in the third act, which is a fantastic third act, and it's the scene where she's being tortured by the Supreme Intelligence and basically learns to fight back and learns to fight that she's, they haven't given her powers; they've been basically dampening her powers to prevent her to become too powerful. And she realizes this, and then she basically breaks free and becomes the most powerful superhero we have seen so far. And it's just that amazing moment where she says, "Oh, you're human. What do you know?" And it's like showing her scenes of her getting knocked down, but then, of course, humans learn to pick themselves back up again. And like you say, that scene where she tells Jude Law, "I have nothing to prove to you." He wants to fight her one on one without any powers, and then she does the Raiders of the Lost Ark gag and basically shoots him down and then sort of drags him off and says, "Yeah, because she has got nothing to prove to you, the man who's kept her down all this time." And that's clearly a bigger message to, she's got, Marvel, Brie Larson, Captain Marvel. They got nothing to prove to the internet naysayers who say, "Oh, this film's going to be terrible. It's not going to do anything," and then they've been proven spectacularly wrong by having it the second biggest superhero opening of all time, just behind Black Panther. It's almost like women and people of minorities, whatever, want to see themselves represented on the big screen. So Captain Marvel, I don't think could have been brought in before now. Otherwise, it would have been just like, "Oh well, she'll solve everything. She'll solve everything." You've got a person who's as powerful as Thanos. You could see that it needed like a team of 5 of them to just bring him down to his knees at one point to nearly win. So the fact if she was around, it would have been too easy, I think. So, but again, we don't know exactly what's going to happen in Avengers Endgame. But I think it puts them in a very interesting place about where you move forward with a being as powerful as she is. So, of course, we don't know what's happened to her from the time that she disappears. Maybe something's happened where she's maybe not. Maybe she is slightly more vulnerable than when we left her. But it's going to be interesting to see, I think, how she, like you say, how she fits into the overall structure of the MCU.
Yeah, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but she hasn't really been sort of tested in terms of, say, her powers. That she's taken on a couple of sort of people of her similar abilities, really, until the most part when she kind of gains her powers at the end and she smashes through some ships. But I suppose it's the same for a lot of the Marvel characters, that they've faced some kind of easy opposition here and there. No offense, Jude Law, I'm sure she takes him down quite easily. But when she maybe comes up against something that's a bit more mighty, a Thanos or whatever, for example, it could be a real test. And I suppose that's always the thing with the sequels, is it always gets harder for them, and I think that could be the case as well. It'll be interesting to see how she goes up against it. We've seen how the others have succeeded or failed when faced off against Thanos, but let's see what comes next.
Well, it's going to be very interesting, I think, given the fact that it's been revealed that her power essentially has come from the Tesseract. So she basically has the power of one of the Infinity Stones within her. So how that goes up against an Infinity Gauntlet with the actual Tesseract in it as well is going to be very interesting. And although it does, Marvel are great about retconning on the fly about how all these things do, but we were all under the assumption that the Tesseract was picked up by Howard Stark at the end of Captain America: The First Avenger and has been in Shield's possession ever since, up until the Avengers, when Nick Fury gets, Dr. Eric Selvig to work on it. But it turns out that for a period of time between 1940 whatever and 1990, it was apparently somewhere else, and then fell into the hands of Wendy Lawson and Annette Bening's character to work on a Lightspeed engine. So where was it then? It's like, oh, okay, everything we know keeps changing, and I'm sure there must be a reason for that, because you know we can all look up Wikipedia. We can all basically, everyone who watches these movies are super fans. They know exactly where they go wrong and whatever. I mean, the amount of people who pointed out the tube stop incident in Thor: The Dark World, that it's not 3 stops from Charing Cross to Greenwich. You actually have to change trains, and it's about 11 stops. People were up in arms about that. So the fact that they're now messing with the timeline of the Tesseract is quite interesting, I think.
Yeah, I kind of lost a bit track because I thought it came up and I thought, where's it kind of been? I sort of assumed they found it at obviously the end of Captain America, and then it's sort of probably been in some sort of Indiana Jones style basement, and then I wonder if it's going to be a case that the Air Force or whatever it was at, they kind of had some access to it, and Dr. Marvel or whatever it was that kind of got access to it through that. That was kind of my head canon that I've got for it, but I'm sure someone will come up with some sort of side comic or mini movie that explains it.
Exactly, yeah. And then there's the thing that everyone kept referring to Shield as Shield, even though Agent Coulson in the first Iron Man referred to, of course, as the Strategic Homeland Intervention and etc. Blah blah blah. They need to come up with a better name for that. So the fact that they've gone back and now everyone referred to it as Shield, apart from Coulson, I don't know. But yeah, it's one of those things. But yeah, you just have to. I mean, they're spinning so many plates now and trying to keep so many sort of plot threads dangling in the right place. That yeah, there's things are going to slightly fall through the crack. But yeah, you obviously it takes you'd add an extra couple of. You probably add an extra 5 minutes of runtime onto Captain Marvel if you had every single person give the full name of Shield when they were talking about Shield during that film as well. So, we'll give them the benefit of the doubt on that one. So yeah, what are your final thoughts on Captain Marvel? I know you were not so keen, but looking back on it, talking about it, has it swung you either way, or are you still sort of? Where does it rank? Do you have a rough ranking of where you put it at the moment in the MCU films?
Yeah, it's probably in and around sort of the 17 mark, and as I say, I just have some issues with it, and I think it's a fine enough movie. It's just one of these ones that I've kind of found with sort of the MCU with this one and sort of Ant-Man. It's kind of got a bit of a feel of kind of very similar plot lines that I've seen before in the Marvel universe, and it may have elements that I like in it, like sort of Brie Larson, Sam Jackson, Paul Rudd, but the ultimate story is like, oh, I've kind of seen this before, give me something a little bit new, and those kind of films have left me a bit wanting, but it certainly left me optimistic and bright for the future, and I'm looking forward to seeing what comes next, and especially how Captain Marvel is going to fit in with this Endgame.
Yeah, no, I think it is very much, I think at the moment, a sort of mid-tier Marvel film for me. I initially rated it as a 3. Rewatched it again, I'd probably bump that up to a 4. I liked it a lot more second time round. I enjoyed it a lot more. But it is very much, this more than a lot of the other ones, is very much an origin story. You don't really get to see what Brie Larson is truly capable of in the role until around about the last 20 minutes. But that, as a jumping off point, there is huge potential, I think, for her as an actress with the character and for the character moving forward. So I'm very excited to see what she does in Avengers Endgame, and even beyond that, as they say, sort of higher, faster, further. So it's my only regret, I think, for the film is when I read the rumor that apparently Keanu Reeves was originally approached for the Jude Law part, and I think he would have made a great foil, but apparently it was John Wick 3 filming got in the way that meant he couldn't do it. But hopefully the offer is still open, because I think Keanu Reeves in the MCU, I think in some role would be something quite entertaining that I would love to see. But of course we will be back, in in around about 6 or 7 weeks, I think, for Avengers Endgame. Just as Captain Marvel will return, we will return to review that. But in the meantime, if you need any more sort of Captain Marvel and female superhero goonies on the Nerd Party, Nerd Nuptial this week will feature Tristan and the girl talking about Captain Marvel, and Sean on Missing Frames, I think, is looking at Supergirl for the very first time. So that's one film which I don't think I've ever actually seen. That may be one of the few superhero films I've never seen. Have you ever seen that one, Lee?
I have not seen it either, but I will certainly have to make an effort for good old
Absolutely,
Sean.
yeah. No, we'll join him and watch it for the first time with that. But that's all from us this time. As always, check us out on Twitter. So if people want to talk about movies and talk about Captain Marvel and either the good points, the negative points, or if they want to have a rant at you for being a man sticking up for a female superhero character, where can they find you?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitter at Lee_Nostromo, not spouting any bile abuse online unless it's about maybe my own football club who lost to Southampton yesterday. So, that's my target of fury. What about for yourself?
They can find me at @JampCelluloid on Twitter. So until next time, it's higher, faster, further from us, and we'll catch you for Avengers Endgame. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Join the revolution. Join the Nerd Party.
Welcome to Nerd